am grateful for y'all to be here. I want to give you guys all a chance to introduce yourself. Rachel, we lost your video again, but that it's no worries. Your profile picture is gorgeous. So if we could give each other a little brief introduction, where you're coming from, what you do at your school, and sort of what you are thinking about for the school in terms of partnerships abroad, and what you're thinking about, sort of like what's on your mind today about what you'd like to get out of this. And then we'll give Ben a chance to talk about his Excel program and how they've really worked hard to develop meaningful reciprocal relationships with their travel programs for their kids. So Damaris, I'm looking left to right. So aside from Ben, who is going to introduce himself in more detail in a minute, you want to start?
Sure. I'm Damaris McLean. I'm our Director of Community Engagement and Service Learning at Nightingale. We are in New York. We're a K through 12 all-girls school, and I'm in an office with lots of people, so they'll be coming in and out behind me. But we do travel, international travel. We don't do international service because we think it's important to have reciprocal relationships, and I don't know how to do that yet. We don't have relationships, but we are starting an exchange. We have an exchange with several schools, St. Paul's in London, and we're starting one with the St. Mary's School in South Africa.
Great. And Luana, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, certainly. My name is Luana Nissan, and I'm the Director of Community Engaged Learning at Park Tudor School in Indianapolis. And as in many schools, I would say trips are really in the realm of world languages or separate from community service and service learning. And so that doesn't fall under our purview, but like other areas of school life, there really is an opportunity for deep, reciprocal, mutually beneficial relationships. And so helping our kids understand their community locally and globally is important to the work that we do. So kind of learning from colleagues is important, and understanding the models that are out there will be important as we start to engage in those conversations even within our school.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, welcome.
Hey, Blake, how are you? I sound extremely nasal. It's because spring is here, and with it, allergy season is at its apex. So my name is Mark Corliss. I teach Mandarin at Trinity Poly School, about an hour north of the city. Here in New York. I've worked in lots of schools for a long time. I'm also the international student coordinator, so I spend a lot of time in Asia meeting with parents and prospective students, and just making sure everything's going well with everyone. I'm interested in doing more than just connecting with a school. We have a couple of relationships with schools right now in China, but what I'm looking for is actually developing, partnering with them to do service opportunities. And so building out beyond, making the exchange piece something that's feels a bit more authentic and organic and live year to year, rather than just let's go see what everybody does, in each other's environs.
Perfect. I imagine that is true for most schools, that they're looking for that. Rachel, welcome.
Hello. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. I'm just having some tech problems. I am at Riverdale Country School in the Bronx in New York, and I am the school's Director of Service Learning. We work closely together with our Global Studies program for the trips that combine service with our Global Studies. Of course, I think as somebody already said, Luana, that there are certainly Global Studies trips of ours that go out to Spain and France, China, that have, are more have a focus more of cultural and language immersion, and don't really look to incorporate service at all. And then there are other trips of ours where I come into play, that weave service into the Global Studies experience. So I can give you a couple of examples, and I like what you said about global. I mean, global can be, very local too. That can even, global studies can be, in New York, or it doesn't have to be abroad. It can, we've got trips that are going out this weekend actually to New Orleans and to Alabama, and to Detroit, actually, sorry. Detroit and New Orleans are going this weekend, and then in the fall, a trip to Alabama. Some of which have a service focus, with work with Habitat for Humanity, as I'm sure a lot of your schools do as well. The Detroit trip is very much not a service learning trip, and we make that clear. We're not going in to save Detroit. We are going in to learn about, urban studies and the infrastructure of Detroit and why Detroit is a city, that it is today, and how the history of it. So that's an interesting take on that trip. And then, of course, we have some that go much farther away. I'm leading a trip this June. It's our second time back to Christchurch, New Zealand, to do some service work around rebuild of their city post-earthquakes. So it's a big trip. And we are actually partnering. So we partnered 2 years ago, the first time around, with the Sumner School in Christchurch, New Zealand, which is a K-8 school. So our kids did homestays with them, and they had a whole week-long immersion into service learning and some projects that they did together with some nonprofits out there through a Riverdale alum connection, actually. And then we are going back this summer to build on that work and that homestay experience. But we've added in another school and a stop along the way in Honolulu, Hawaii, which is amazing, with the Punahou School there, which is the K-12 school, and we're doing some service learning, but also cultural immersion and sustainability work while at Punahou, and then traveling together with Punahou to New Zealand. So it should be exciting, and it's a growing, I don't know, it's gonna be great. Hawaii and New Zealand, so.
It's like a horrible trip.
I know, it's terrible. I can't believe I have to go. It's, summer and then winter within a day, which is wild.
It is. I did a trip once. I did a student learning trip, Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. And I was like, I can't believe I'm getting paid for this.
I know. It's really, and it's with two awesome schools all around service and rebuild and, getting kids to think outside the box in terms of, what is it going to take for you to do something, to act, to become, an active citizen. So whether it's an earthquake or the environment or the political scene right now, like what's going to move you to make change in this world. So it's fascinating. Yeah, it's really cool.
Great. Okay, thank you guys. I'm so glad you're here. And Ben, this is Ben Snyder from Nobles in Massachusetts. I'm going to let him introduce himself. And then he's going to speak a little bit about what they do at their school to really hone in on this meaningful. I mean, we all use the words meaningful, reciprocal, sustainable partnerships and relationships abroad. And I know one thing for sure that will come out of here knowing is that it's not easy. And that it takes a lot of legwork. And so, Ben, thank you for sharing your work with us. I'm happy to introduce you all to this program.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much, you guys. As I listen to you, I actually don't feel like I need to really present very much because you guys are all doing really interesting, cool things, and I'm far from expert on this, I think. So let me just give you a little bit of sort of background on me and what's sort of evolved here at Nobles over probably about 20 years. So my name again is Ben Snyder, and my title is Director of Experiential and Community Engaged Learning at Nobles, which we call Excel. And we have a Center for Excel now that's endowed by a very generous donor that helps support my salary and that of some other people. But I was the head of the upper school here for 20 years until 2015, and then took a sabbatical and then moved into this role. And so it's been an interesting journey for us. And I guess what I'll do is let me throw out some ideas that that surely you guys have all thought about beforehand, and just get into a conversation. I think you guys were all using the word partnerships as you talked about some of the things that you're doing. We've been really fortunate to develop a whole bunch of different partnerships. And we are so far from perfect in this, and there's so much we still need to do. But let me just sort of, I guess the couple of areas I'd throw in here. First is sort of institutional commitment has really been a big part of this, and I think we had a particular advantage in this because of what my prior role was, right? I know that often people who are doing service learning work or global studies work, things like that within their schools, don't necessarily feel that they have the support of the administration, but fortunately I was the administration. So that really helped, right? And allowed something to begin kind of organically and entrepreneurially, but to build upon the mission of the school, and be able to get long-term commitments from the school, which then allowed us to build commitments to partners over a long period of time. So on the commitment side, first, we talk a lot about mission. Again, missions can be a lot like, well, they all sound the same often, right? And our mission over the last decade has really shifted towards a concept of leadership for the public good, has sort of evolved into that kind of mantra for the school, which now kids at Nobles and graduates of the last 10 years, like you say, what's the mission of Nobles? And the kids go, oh, leadership for the public good, which has allowed the service learning side of what we do and the experiential education side, particularly on sort of off-campus things, really grow. And we've been able to put money behind it. We work on a principle here of anything we offer at Nobles has to be available to every student. So fortunately, we have endowed funds that allow us to make sure that all the programs that we have and create are accessible to all of our students. And we've basically on the travel side have gone down sort of, I'd say 2.5 paths. The first, it sounds like all of you are doing for sure, and I think actually all of you are doing both. One revolves around sort of what we call language and cultural immersion, where essentially we develop partnerships with schools. We have partnerships in Japan, China, France, and Spain that are now long-standing, some as long as 20 years, that, it's back and forth. We go there one year, they come here the next year, homestay, the whole thing. It sounds like you're all doing that. And then we have then basically service-focused partnerships. And the process of identifying the partners is, I think, the most challenging thing that we've had to do over time, is finding the right partners. And one of the ways in which we've been able to develop partnerships actually is by hiring really good people. Because I was in charge of the hiring here for a long time, it was something I looked for as we went through the hiring process. So, for example, I just got out of a meeting with a science teacher and a history teacher who led a trip to Guatemala. I think it's like our 4th or 5th trip to Guatemala. And one of these teachers had been to Guatemala leading service-based trips in her prior employment. And so that really made it clear that we were able to develop a partnership there because we needed something in Central or South America. So as we looked at sort of the span of what we were doing, we were able to identify people who we would hire or people who were already on staff who developed relationships. And if I were to say one thing that has really sustained and made these partnerships work, is because they're built on pre-existing relationships. And that we've really used our community to connect us to people. So to people or organizations that we feel are like-minded and that we can have a mutually beneficial relationship with. So that they're getting as much out of the relationship as we're getting, and that we're making meaningful contributions. So those kinds of things range from an organization, an NGO in India that one of our parents introduced us to and actually funded a trip for a couple of faculty members to go and scope out something, right? But it was a family who knew of our commitment to this kind of global experiential and service-based education, who said, look, I think it's important for you to be in India. Here, I'll give you some money to go get it set up, and I'll help you develop some options. So it's evolved into, in the course of a school year, we'll probably send close to 200 kids out 32 to 35 different faculty members on anywhere from 8 to 11 or 12 different trips, ranging in ages from 7th grade through 12th grade. All the trips are
Ben,
set by.
sorry, can I just interrupt really for a second? How many
Yeah.
kids do you have total in your high school? So when you say
In high school, we have 500 kids. 500 kids in the high school, 100 kids in the middle school. So majority of the kids who go are from the high school, and we give about, I would say we give about $140,000 of aid every year to allow kids who can't afford it to go. Those are basically endowed funds that we've raised in the last 25 years. So that's been
I'm sorry, Ben. Could you say that? Could you say how much you gave out in aid for that again, please?
about 140,000.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So the principle we've worked on there is, if we're going to make it available to anybody, it's got to be available financially to everybody, which has somewhat limited our growth because I think our demand exceeds our supply at the moment. And about 80% of our kids before they graduate will have been on a Nobles trip of some kind. And the trips range from, relatively locally, to go to a camp, to volunteer at a camp on a lake in Maine for children who are battling cancer, to, we've been in New Orleans every year since Katrina, to partners in the Himalayas and in rural South Africa and Rwanda and urban Romania and, all over the place. And they've basically all developed out of some kind of personal interest or relationship that someone on our faculty has had or developed. And the goal with those, in terms of trying to make them sustainable, has been to have leaders build trips, make them kind of bulletproof, and then train people to take them over after that person basically gets tired of it. And that's actually one of our big long-term challenges, is sustaining the people and the amount of work that it takes to pull these things off, because as you guys know, it's a ton of work.
is there a stipend for faculty to do that?
And there is. We pay, this is only the second year we've given stipends. The stipends are for a trip leader. So the person who basically organizes the trip, we give $750 for each week they're leading a trip. Okay. If you're a chaperone, we give $375 for a week that you're chaperoning on a trip. For a trip leader, I mean, I've led a trip every March break for 15 years, and it works out to about, I don't know, $2 an hour. Right? I mean, it doesn't come close to compensating to the extent that it should. It's better than nothing, and I'm hoping that we can work it, either increase the stipend or actually through this contract. Let me throw a couple of other pieces here, which you guys already know probably, but then we can just sort of talk a little bit. Partnership model has really, really helped us with is the risk management side. In that by having partners on the ground, like we actually were about to start something in Istanbul this year, and I had been lucky enough to spend a chunk of time in Istanbul while I was on sabbatical, but our partner there basically about a month before we were going to go said, don't come, right? There's some stuff going on like in our neighborhood, don't do this. And so what has happened over time and some of these partnerships have been now 10, 15, 20 years, is it really has allowed us to, within our own community, allow parents who would never think about sending their kids to South Africa or Rwanda or Romania or Guatemala to go, you guys have been doing this for a while. Clearly people are coming back happy, fulfilled, safe, and healthy. and so that has been a huge, huge piece for us in terms of being able to assure the community that that the experience the kids have in places that are really very different from our own are good, and that they want to do it. The other thing I would say is we have shut off any travel opportunity that feels like you're getting on and off a tour bus. Like, we just don't allow it anymore. We used to do this for our middle schoolers, and it was, we'd sign on with some tour company, and our kids would get on and off a bus and stay in a nice hotel, and we sort of rationalized it as a good, dip your toe in the water to travel. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we said we can do better than this on our own and create better experiences that are more substantive and stretch our kids more. So we gave that up, much to the dismay of a couple of faculty members who, in my mind, used it as a nice way to have a good vacation with a bunch of kids that was free and see a bunch of museums they hadn't seen before. So we cut that off, and I think it's really been to the benefit of the program and to our kids. So, themes are, around growing stuff ourselves. We don't use any tour companies. We never really have. The only kind of tour companies that we use are on the ground within the countries we're going to for logistical support. So, we'll find a local, our partners generally find us someone who can handle the on-the-ground logistics in India or Rwanda or South Africa or places where we don't speak the language, and where we need the partners on the ground. But we always go local because that also cuts the cost dramatically, right? And by local, I mean in the country, or destination country. It really, really keeps your costs much more manageable. So those are a few ideas. I guess the last thing I'd throw out there is just faculty commitment to this thing is tremendous, and a lot of that faculty commitment, I think, comes from the people we've hired. We built this thing with faculty not being compensated at all. I think now the amount of work it takes, even though the partnerships have allowed it, to be a little bit less stressful for trip leaders, I think we still need to move a little farther. Another thing we've really got to work on is sort of curriculum in terms of preparing kids and Lakeside, for those of you who know Lakeside, I mean, they've got a program that really is pretty fantastic in terms of how they prepare kids for the experience and their longer experiences, and they get quote unquote credit for it on their transcript. We've not gotten to that stage yet, but maybe someday. So I don't know, there's 10 or 12 minutes of my rambling. So happy to hear what other people have to say, or what you think, or questions you have, or get into a conversation.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Ben. It is so great to hear. And I think what's interesting to me is how curious everybody is about the details of what you're doing at your school, when it's just a confirmation of whether you're doing it the same or if there's a better way. And it's, anyway, it's great to share. Thank you for being honest about sharing numbers and places and that kind of stuff, because it's, for some reason, schools seem territorial about information like that, and it really shouldn't be that way, because you're all sort of, especially this particular group of educators, you're all sort of working with the same, around the same sort of resources and kids.
Can I just throw one more thing in there? Like, we're 100% transparent about who we work with and all that stuff, but we're not in the business of introducing other schools to our partners.
Yeah.
For a bunch of different reasons, but primarily, I really believe that the best partnerships are homegrown partnerships. We all in our communities have people who can help us set up really good partnerships. And that there's a piece of this that's just kind of, I mean, again, I was really helped by the job that I had for so long, but I would be aggressively friendly with Noble's families, right? And who do you know? What do you think? Where could, one of our partners in South Africa was introduced to us by a parent who had done some work through City Year, right? And it was like boom, boom, boom. But it gave us the introduction that was really sincere and genuine and personal. And all of our schools have those people in them. It's just that oftentimes they're not either they're not identified or they don't feel valued or connected to the work that we're doing. And I think that's something that's really been helpful to us, because we've got a lot of good families who've helped us do a lot of neat stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great. I think that's probably true for all partnerships. I mean, we say that all the time, that the cornerstone of every strong partnership or relationship is relationship based.
Yeah.
You can't just show up with 15 kids without some sort of level of trust that you're all on the same page and that you have the same goals, and you know, and you can have honest conversations about what's working and what's not working.
Yeah.
Okay, questions for Ben, please.
Or for each other. I've got questions for you guys too. So.
Hey, Ben, I have one for you right away. Just and it'll dovetail off of Blake's most recent point. Talk to me about, like, I certainly hear what you have to say and applaud you for it and appreciate about not going with canned tour groups. Mm-hmm. Even something like, you know, even the you know, maybe the best is, you know, not the right word to use here, like, but something like Rustic Pathways, who actually tries in theory to get a little more authentic. Yeah. But I'm new to this school, but I know that this school particularly is deathly afraid of the insurance and risk factor of not. And so how did you manage that piece?
Okay, that's a great question. We have done a couple of things around that. One is we spent a lot of time with our insurance broker, right? And the school's umbrella liability policy, we may be on the same one with you guys. Fred C. Church is the organization that we do our insurance with, and it's a big consortium of independent schools in New England. Right. And so they have our liability side covered in massive amounts, right? And I'm sure all of our schools have this, because you guys are all really good schools with resources, right? So you've got this, but people don't necessarily know about it. So I can send around, if Blake, if you want me to, the person who does this for us and who's been really helpful to us. The other thing that's done for us is we've bought into a thing called International SOS. I don't know if you guys are familiar with International SOS.
Is that like Dan, the old Divers Assist thing?
Kind of like Dan, yeah, okay. In a way. But you know, the services they provide allow us access to, you know, to a lot of information in terms of country reports about, you know, potential risk factors while we're there, as well as places to turn and things to do if something goes wrong. So that has also been helpful.
I was in Cuba in March, and I was on the phone with SOS several times.
And how were they?
They were great. They were great.
Yeah, they're
really responsive.
Knock on wood, we haven't had to use them a ton, but when we've used them, they've been great, right? When we've used them, they've been great. And it's not, I mean, I think our policy with them is like $5,000 a year or something, but it's part of this consortium, so it's not an insane amount of money for the coverage you get. In fact, it may be less than $5,000. I think that was the first year, and then other schools went in. So it takes some reassurance from people outside your school, often to help people within the school understand that you're just as much at risk taking kids on a field trip.
Do that. Can I pin you down? I don't want to hog this up, but can I pin you down, Ben, on, because this is obviously a sticking point for me. I get the example of the Hotchkiss incident. Pushed in my face all the time. But I'm assuming that Hotchkiss would have been part of that consortium as well, and they would have gone through all the good practices around this.
Yeah, and their judgment won't end up being what it was. It
was a judgment that killed them, right?
Like $40 million, right? But it won't. But it's not going to ultimately be that, because basically every college and university in the country is paying attention to that case and has thrown a lot of money at it to make sure it doesn't end up as the initial verdict was. One of the things that caused us to do, though, which was good and healthy, was to re-examine all of the release forms and contracts we use to basically within the state of Massachusetts, to make sure we're as covered as we can be, because the laws in Connecticut are different than the laws in Massachusetts, which may be different than Indiana or New York, or right. So that is something you need to talk to your school lawyers about. But we, in the wake of the Hotchkiss case, we redid a lot of our contracts with families, and we also re-examined all of our sort of risk management training and procedures, so that we could point to things that we had done along the way in the event that something really does go wrong.
Does everybody know what the Hotchkiss case is? Are we just talking in vague terms? I mean, I'm not trying to expose some case for, troubles of Hotchkiss to all of you. Do you all feel need for clarification?
Everyone okay?
Oh, good.
Okay. So, and I think some of that goes back to sort of the leadership side, Mark, is that, our board, who's really aware of this program and really supportive of it, and our head are really supportive of it. And, now that I have more gray hair and miles on my tires at Nobles, people trust me, and that's really helped a lot. And then we started small, the idea was thinking big but starting small, and that as we began programs, we made sure they were as safe and as positive as they could be, and then that allowed us to grow out, go from 0 to 200 kids, right? That's, 30 kids 20 years ago to 200 now, right? So it takes time and commitment over time.
Does anybody else have any questions? I can save my questions for another time if there's questions. I have a question, Beth. You talk about making sure that it's all available to kids, financially, but how do you culturally get families to think that this is a worthwhile experience? Or, I'm certain you have families that don't travel a lot, that this is uncomfortable for. How do you promote this benefit of these programs and make sure that while you have the money to support the kids, they know how to access it and have the interest and the desire to go on these trips?
Probably the easiest way to describe it is that we have for a long time made it so that when trips return, they have to share what they've done in some way with the community. So it could be something, we have a school assembly 4 mornings a week. It ranges from assembly presentations to displays on bulletin boards to articles in magazines and school newspapers to evenings where we open up where we invite parents in and talk about all the trips and present what they're about, give out preliminary itineraries, and then use the testimonials of kids to share what their experiences have been. And by starting small and just continually, essentially self-promoting, right? It's just internal self-promotion. And now it's actually become part of our admissions sort of brand, that we've done the competitor analysis to know that in our market, there really aren't very many schools doing anything like this, and we're in a very competitive marketplace in Boston. And so we're doing a lot of storytelling in our admissions, and we also have a lot of data now to support and a lot of video to support. So families, as they go through our admissions process, for example, every family that comes in for an interview, our interviewers are instructed to talk about Excel and how Excel reflects the mission of the school, how it gets embodied in all sorts of different ways in the life of the school and the culture of the school, and how accessible we make the programs to all the families. So there'll be, at every admissions open house and event, we've got something going about Excel. We've got stickers and hats and display boards and posters, and so we're constantly trying to let kids know how much fun this is and how challenging it can be and how meaningful it can be. The financial aid side is pretty, it's relatively simple. We put it out to all the parents and to all the kids. Every student, if you're here for 6 years, you can get grants to go on 3 trips, 1 in the middle school, 2 in the upper school. So we do put some limits on it just because some people go every year, right? So we have some limitations. Families who are already on financial aid, we know their financial situation. Families that are not on financial aid are allowed to apply for financial aid for the trips, and we ask them to jump through a couple of hoops that allow them to demonstrate that their family need the funds to go. And so like on this trip, the trip that I took to Rwanda, I had 18 kids, and probably 8 of them had some kind of an award that were probably average of a trip that cost $4,200. The average grant was probably over $3,400.
That's great.
Yeah.
On the 20% of kids that don't go, do you have a survey like why are they not participating?
Yeah, mostly it's boys, right? Mostly it's boys. I'm sure that's true for the rest of you in this world, right? I mean, you know, the girls run it about 2 to 1 over the boys in terms of enrollment on the trips. So it's mostly boys. The kids who don't go typically, you know, I hate to make gross characterizations, but it's a population that's endemic to schools like ours, even highly selective schools like all of ours are, I think. You got some kids and families who they're just not interested, right? And, you know, we push them because we have an 80-hour service requirement for graduation. And I think one of the things that has driven some families and some boys particularly into the travel program is the ability to accumulate service hours. But you can never accumulate more than half of your service hours on a Nobles trip. So that forces kids to do something else besides just go on a trip. And we have such a variety of opportunities. I mean, the trip that we send the most kids on is New Orleans. And we sent 40 kids to New Orleans this year. And since Katrina, we've probably sent over 400 kids to New Orleans.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah, so, and it's awesome. It's great. We're starting to feel the pain of taking that many kids. It's just hard managing that size of a group, particularly for a teacher who's working a cajillion hours every week leading up to their first week of spring break. And you know, by the time you take the taxes out, they get like, you know, take their family out to dinner twice, and that's, you know, so for an insane amount of work. So that's something we still got to address, I think.
Ben, I had a question for you about Excel. First was, what does it stand for again?
Yeah.
And then what is under that umbrella? Because, you know, we're starting to think about, you know, how does service learning and community engagement and the diversity and equity and inclusion work that we do and experiential ed and outdoor ed, like how does it all overlap? And, you know,
our structure is probably a little different. So it stands for experiential and community engaged learning.
Okay.
That came out of that acronym came out of our last strategic planning process, where we realized that we had all these various programs that needed to be sort of pulled together. So the things that fall under that are our travel program,
okay,
our study away opportunities. So we'll have, you know, that 80% figure I gave you includes students who go and study away for a semester or a year.
okay.
So this year we'll have, in this current school year, we probably had 12 or 13 kids, juniors, go away for all or part of their junior year. Next year we could have as many as 17 or 18. And we don't make them pay tuition here, and we allow financial aid to travel with them. And we'll have kids, I think, in 7 different programs next year. So travel and study away is kind of one area. The next area is the whole service learning piece. The third area is are basically 2 programs that we run for low-income, first-generation college-bound kids.
Okay.
One is a program called Achieve, which is for middle school students from Boston Public Schools who would be in the first generation of their family to go to college and meet certain low-income standards. The second is an Upward Bound program, if you guys are familiar with Upward Bound, not Outward Bound, but Upward Bound. And we have a partnership with the University of Massachusetts at Boston that we've had for 26 years, where we work with Lawrence High School. And Nobles has a small 5-day boarding component. So we bring about 75 kids from Lawrence here for the 6 weeks in the summer, and then 2 Saturdays a month during the school year. And so because I just happen to have, I was very involved in bringing both of those programs to Nobles.
Mm-hmm.
We've thrown those under, experiential and community engaged learning. So I spent a fair amount of time on that, helping with fundraising and governance and proposal writing and management. Yeah. The 2 people who run those programs are younger faculty, so an older guy who's been through a couple wars can be helpful to them occasionally. So there's that, and then the 4th area, which is which is still evolving, we call applied learning, which is more kind of hands-on, problem-solving, process-based work. So things like we have a senior project program where about 85–90% of our seniors start drop classes during the 4th quarter. We have classes in entrepreneurship and innovation, various kind of hands-on sorts of courses that I work with some teachers on. And then we also have our outdoor program, kind of fits under the applied learning, which is an area we've got a lot of work to do on. But so those are the sort of the basic 4 areas. And I can send Blake a little video, like a little 2-minute video that she can share that just sort of articulates all 4 of those. And you'll have to hear me talk a little more, but the guy who does the video is really good. So, the images tell much more than my words could.
Great. Go ahead.
I have a couple questions. But first, Rachel, if your school is doing visioning work, it sounds like some of the areas that you asked about diversity and service learning and other areas, you may want to take a look at the collegiate school in Richmond. They have, their umbrella is called Responsible Citizenship and has 8 areas that fall under it.
Okay. Can you just say that again? So it's the collegiate school where?
Collegiate school in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
Fascinating model. And
what's it called? Responsible
Citizenship.
Interesting.
And Claire Sisiski started as a global education director, and she's the director of Responsible Citizenship. She, I'm sure, be really
cool.
Happy to talk with you about that model.
Thank you. Yeah, we're looking at different schools and how the language that you choose, it seems small, but it's actually has quite an impact. So.
Yeah, and I would say actually, and I think Ben has talked a lot about this, really the way you look at grounding whatever's created in the mission of the school.
Right.
So often what's created ends up being so small, and yet there are all these through threads to other programs. We're so program oriented, but diversity and social responsibility or civic engagement are so connected.
They're all connected, yes, exactly. And service learning and social justice work, but also experiential ed and global studies. There's all these ties that keep all those programs, as you say, connected.
Yeah, and so how do we build synergy, and how do we think actually together rather than separately, I think is really one of the huge challenges. Exactly. But Ben, I had a couple of questions. I stepped out of the room when you were talking about faculty stipends, and for us this is, a question and an issue. I was wondering if you could, I heard you say that you pay a stipend to trip leaders, those who develop the trips. Yeah. And you mentioned an amount for that, but you said you also pay for chaperones?
Yeah, so we pay the chaperones $375 stipend for a week.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And, but I did have a question that wasn't. Oh, the Global Education Benchmarking Group that started years ago, kind of with the backing of NAIS. Have you used any of the resources, or did you develop kind of from scratch on your own? You actually started your program years before that benchmarking group came together.
Yeah, I mean, we use some of the stuff from GEBG. I was actually going to mention GEBG because we use their data to figure out what we should stipend people around. In other words, they had a bunch of data about who's stipending for how much. And we wanted to just to get a sense of where people were on it.
Okay.
So we're a member of GEBG. We were one of the first schools, I think, to join GEBG. I think we are using their resources less. I think, than most members do, just because we have a lot of experience with this. And so I think one of the things that's been really interesting for us is the work with them, or the thinking with folks in GEBG about the risk management side. And so we have sort of gone back and forth between bringing people in from the outside to work with our trip leaders and chaperones on risk management, and doing sort of internal programming around risk management. But it's important for us to be doing the risk management. And so GEBG has been helpful for that. I wouldn't say it's been particularly helpful it hasn't been helpful at all in developing program, but because our philosophy is to home grow stuff, because we think it creates longer lasting and more meaningful relationships. It's, and I guess that, we haven't needed them as much. The other thing I should say is that, like, not all partnerships and relationships are perfect. Like, we've had to drop some along the way, right? And you kind of have to be prepared for that. I mean, yeah, and I could tell you a couple of stories about some things, but I won't bore you. Although they are kind of interesting, but we've decided, maybe over a beer, we all get together for a beer, or a glass of wine sometime. If you were,
now there's a Google Hangout.
Right, we would have our own stories, but maybe, Blake, the next time it's like BYOB, and we do it at
at 7 o'clock.
Right, yeah, wait for a good time to do it. Let's have happy hour with Google Hangout. We can share stories, but yeah, sometimes you have to admit defeat and retreat, right? And it's not, it just didn't go the way we want, and you step away from it, and and that's okay. And then the other thing I would throw out there, which is also hard, and I was helped significantly by my prior role and continue to be helped by it, is that there's some teachers who really want to do this, but there's no chance in hell I'm putting them in that spot, right? They think, oh, this is cool, this is a great opportunity, I get to go to Rwanda or Guatemala or China or whatever with 12 kids or 14 kids, and what a great thing. And I'm going, you don't make good decisions around here every day, right? How are you going to make good decisions in a country you've never been to with a group of kids who have never been there? You know what I mean? Like, and so I don't know about you guys, but we have more faculty who would like to do this than I have the willingness to give them opportunities to do it. And it's, there's some people who are unhappy with me, and when I retire, they'll be perfectly happy to see me go.
How do you vet those, like, trip proposals, and how do you solicit new proposals?
I'm gonna say goodbye. I'm sorry, I have some students waiting. So it was great to be with you all. Thank you. Thanks, Blake.
You're welcome. It's great to see you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
So to answer your question, we have basically a trip proposal process. Mm-hmm. And so we say to the faculty, if you'd like to submit a proposal for a trip, here's what you need to do. And put together the trip, identify the partnership, and that's usually where trip proposals fall, right? Fall down. Is that someone says, oh, I got this, like I had, my door's closed enough. Like I had a young teacher who really wanted to go to the Galapagos and to Ecuador, right? It would be a hugely expensive trip. She put together this proposal, and I sat down with her and I said, okay, so we run on the partnership model. Everybody at Nobles knows this is the way we do things. Who's our partner? And there's this long silence. And she's not someone who I would put in charge of a group a long way away. She's actually very involved in another one of our trips, this one with kids battling cancer, and she's awesome with it, right? But that's in like Damariscotta, Maine, or Lake Sebago, Maine. It's a whole lot different than Galapagos or rural Ecuador. So we have this trip proposal process, and there's usually enough we put the bar high enough that people can understand what they really have to think it through. And so the people who are not prepared to lead trips, or to create trips from scratch, generally don't make it very far. The other thing that's helped is I don't mean to sound too self-serving, but I've been very lucky to travel a lot, and so a lot of the partnerships I've developed or had people introduce me to people and then gotten the funding to go check places out, set stuff up, and then make it work. And then pass it to other people. Right. So, but that's, and and sometimes you have to be willing just to, and you guys, just given what your jobs are, need to get backup from whoever whoever the head of your division, whoever, what I mean? Like whoever's in that position within your school to say, look, I don't think so-and-so should be doing this. And then you can tag team it with that person to get cover from that person.
And Ben,
does that answer your question, Damar? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I have two questions. Was that the main purpose of your sabbatical? Was to go and work on your partnerships, and is a sabbatical a traditional thing that happens at Nobles every given amount of years, or was this a rare opportunity at your school?
No, we do. I've been lucky enough to have two in my time at Nobles. They come about every 12 to 13 years. And you have, for me, it wasn't the express purpose, but it turned out to be very much so. The first sabbatical I had was in 2000, and I took my wife's a teacher here as well, and so we both had a sabbatical, and we took our kids out of school. They were 9 and 10 at the time, and traveled, and a couple of partnerships came out of that. And then this last sabbatical, which was in 14, 15, my wife and I also traveled for about 6 months, and the Rwanda partnership came out of that, which is an introduction through a Nobles family. And then a partnership in Turkey came out of it, and then I was able to sort of to spend time with partners in Japan and China. But those were partnerships that already existed. Cemented some partnerships and opened up some new ones. And I also visited partners in South Africa on that trip. So as you may be able to tell, I kind of get off on this stuff. So even though it wasn't a required part of my sabbatical, but I've been lucky enough to have a couple of opportunities to do this, and rented out my house and canceled my car insurance and cut off my cell phone bills and stay with and just sleep on people's couches, and so there's been a tangent, there's certainly been benefit to Nobles from that.
It's great. I'm jealous. I'd love to take my kids out of school and go travel.
I'm a lucky guy.
Does anybody have any other questions? No, I'm aware of the time. It's almost 4 o'clock, and it's the end of your day for sure, and it's Thursday, so it means it's very close to the end of your week. And so I bet you guys want to go. I really appreciate you being here, Ben. Thank you so much for sharing about your programs. I hope everybody found it useful. Your emails are all not hidden in that email that I sent you if you want to connect outside of this conversation. And Ben, if you send me some of those, your video, and there was another thing that you had mentioned that you would send me that I can share. It was something to do with your insurance rider. Oh,
I'll send you, I'll send you the insurance stuff.
And the video, and then I'll share that with everybody. And Ben, I'm assuming I can promote that video through our marketing stuff if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
But I find this extremely exciting, and I have 2 things to say before we go. And one is that, interestingly enough, the next Google Hangout, which has not yet been scheduled, but I have the presenter in place, is about how, Rachel, it's about diversity and how to work your diversity and inclusion with your service learning, and to how to get all those parts talking. And I know in particular you've been talking to the people at Lab School in Chicago, and Ken Garcia Gonzalez there had this amazing presentation last week when we were up there, and so we will sort of repeat that presentation as a Google Hangout, and I will of course let you know when that is. And the second is that we can all have our beer and share our stories at the NNSP First Annual Conference, which will be next February 4th and 5th in Baltimore. So that is very exciting. And I hope you all put it on your calendars now. And I hope we can share our stories and learn from one another and move forward. So big news for us. And I hope you all will participate with us.
That's awesome.
So
Hey,
thank you guys so much for being here. I thought this was a great conversation. I maybe just travel abroad is like a cornerstone of my education. I told my kids it's the one thing that's not negotiable in college. But it's really interesting to hear how effective it can be in high school and even in middle school. So anyway, thank you guys for being here.
Thank
you for organizing.
Please reach out.
Thanks. It was fun. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Blake.